Hello and welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast. My name is Kevin Teeler. I'm the host of the podcast and the CEO of Sales Code. This week, I'm delighted to introduce Jennie Drimmer. Jennie is the Chief Revenue Officer for Thomas International. Jennie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. It's Friday, isn't it?
It is, and it's moderately sunny, so we'll take it.
It is. When this podcast goes out in a few weeks, it probably won't go out on a Friday, but that doesn't matter. We're feeling good about it. It's going to be a sunny weekend, I think, so I'm always pleased about that. Where are you based now?
I'm just in Greater London area, so just in Surrey.
Okay. Oh, very nice too. You're not from Surrey, though, are you? I detect from the accent some...
This is a niche Surrey accent, but no, in all seriousness, I've been here almost 20 years next year in the UK, and my children sound nothing like me. So it's always interesting. I have very much not adopted the accent despite a few minor changes.
Right, absolutely. Where were you from originally? In the USA, was it?
We moved over from Washington, D.C., where both my husband and I were with Corporate Executive Board, CEB, which was subsequently acquired by Gartner.
Oh, yeah. That was the Challenger Sales thing, wasn't it?
It was indeed. I worked very closely with Matt Dixon, who I know you had on as well.
I did. He's a great guest, actually. I'm sure you know that. Really, really good. So excited to interview him a few weeks ago.
Absolutely.
So are you a Challenger Sale enthusiast?
I'm a huge Challenger Sale enthusiast, and I think, as we talked a little bit about before as well, I find Medic to be a fantastic overlay. And it's something we're just in the process of bringing it into Thomas as well, because I think it's a really good initial guardrail to be able to have as we think about opportunity management and shoring that up as well.
Absolutely. Great combination. So one thing we would like to cover today is diversity in sales and sort of the role of women in selling. Because frankly, I have trouble finding enough women CROs to guest on the podcast because there's simply not enough of you. So we'll come back to that in a second. But before we get to that, just so that the listener can get a better idea of your background, how you came to this position, what is it you get paid to do now? How would you describe that role?
Yeah, so I get paid to grow the business foundationally, right? So all things growth sits with me. I often think of myself as the chief problem solver as well. And, a lot of what you do as a revenue leader is helping to really unpick challenges that you're facing to create scalable growth over the course in time. And again, not just fix something or look at something in a microcosm, but create the wheels that you need to succeed over months, years, decades ahead. So at this point in time, my team is very diverse. So I've got the traditional areas in terms of sales and customer success, very, very large team as well, as you can imagine, because at this point, globally, we've got over 8,000 clients, so quite a range of companies and geographies that are part of that. Also then some of the kind of enablement functions, so both sales enablement and also a new RevOps function that we've just been bringing together and scaling, which is really exciting. Training and enablement also is part of the customer success kind of sisterhood, if you will, on that side. So really helping customers to get the best out of our partnership. And then also our channel team, because a really large part of our global footprint, which at this point extends to over 70 countries, is through our channel partners. So the likes of Thomas Mexico, Thomas North America, Thomas Brazil, look and feel like Thomas, but they're actually channel partners. And a key part of the team focused on that as well.
Love it. Actually, what I didn't tell you is that my parents are very generous with giving out full names, and so I've got 3, and the middle initials are T and A, and the T is Thomas. How about that?
There you go. That's a bit.
I've often thought that moving back, I probably should have started with that instead of Kevin, because Kevin is one of those names that are a little bit naff, really. For many, although it's been rehabilitated by the Minions recently.
I never see. It's very interesting because Brits have a different cultural context on names, and what would be considered a name that may not be a cool name here is not the same cultural context I have. So thankfully, my British friends advised when we were naming our children, which was helpful.
How does Kevin play in America these days, do you think?
I don't think anyone would think twice. I think it's probably more popular and common US. Yeah.
Still a few cool Kevins around, like Kevin Bacon. All of increasing age, I'm afraid. But so Thomas International, then you're the CRO for but what sounds like the whole go-to-market there. It's a big function. Lots of moving parts. I can imagine how busy you are during the working day. So again, thank you for making the time today. I really appreciate that. What is it that Thomas does?
Yeah.
What is the, why, if we're looking, who do you sell to and what do you offer, I guess is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. So Thomas is really pretty remarkable because this context, we've got one assessment being done through Thomas every 36 seconds around the world. So that gives you a sense of the scale. And as you think about assessments in the traditional psychometric space, it really is about understanding personality. Who is the person really? What drives them? Communication style, behavior, how do they show up? And then, of course, aptitude, their general intelligence, if you will, which is really critical as you think about fit for specific roles. So a lot of the traditional use cases are in the pre-hire space. A lot of us, I'm sure, have been through different assessments as part of our hiring process. And then also post-hire, I think, as well, really critical as you think about things like high potential identification, as you think about succession planning, looking at a talent slate in a very diverse way without any bias on that. So all of those sorts of topics. And it's interesting as well, Kevin, because certainly having come into the business, I never used assessments as part of my hiring, and I found it hugely beneficial already because in a very fast-moving business like ours, as an example, being able to see what's the ambiguity acceptance of an individual is really, really helpful. Because if I've got someone who really wants something where there's very little change in their role, things are super predefined all the time, the reality is we're not going to be the best fit for them. So being able to know that up front has really, really helped me tighten up the hiring and tighten up the language that we use to talk and understand each other within our team as well.
Wow. A common language of understanding and communication is one of the things I picked up from that, I think.
Absolutely. And I think self-awareness, right?
Absolutely.
We talk a lot about flexing comm style as salespeople, but I think self-awareness and the ability to say, my way of coming into the world, my way of communicating, the pace at which I work isn't better or worse than anyone else's. It's just me and how I operate. And I need to flex to that and understand how you, Kevin, on the other side, show up. Do you like to chit-chat about the weekend? Do you like to get down to business? And again, things like that, the assessments really shine a light on.
I think sometimes we just have to reflect on our own behavior and other people's behavior, don't we? And try and understand whether, if Kevin is being quite direct and forthright and candid in a meeting, is he being difficult or is he just different? Most of the time, I would like to think if I'm self-aware as an individual, I'm just being different, and we have to respect that. But I've also got to be aware that some people are going to see that as confrontational and not always helpful. That kind of nuance, isn't it?
It's so much of what you're saying is resonating with me. So one of the values that we have in my team is assume positive intent. And it links to exactly what you're saying. It's really easy when you have people show up in a different way, right? So I'll give you a very personal example. My team, if they're listening to this, will probably smile and laugh in recognition. My style is generally to get right to the crux of the issue, to move quickly, to be very, very direct. I always do that with good intent, but it's really easy in that environment, in a Teams message or an email, to start to prescribe other motives to all sorts of communication rather than trying to understand that and really, knowing people's behavior and just their personality and how that shows up as well.
Yeah. Well, because as you say, we're all unique. And that's something that because I work helping sales leaders build these great teams we all want. Great teams are not made up of people that are all the same, are they?
Not at all. Quite the opposite. I mean, I think we talk quite a lot about that in the general business world. We all saw what happened through the financial crisis in 2008 and what a lack of diversity, even in boardrooms, caused at that point in time. So I think it's interesting, going back to your comments, it's often the naysayer in the room who will actually have something really value adding to say, but sometimes we're quick to throw that voice out by prescribing intent to that. And similar, I mean, all of us know that from buyers too, right? The naysayer buyer is often the one who's actually most engaged and you want to be dealing with.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're the ones you want. You're absolutely right. I think that's because people that agree with everything you say are not always going to be the people that are going to purchase. So in fact, objections are always good, aren't they? If they're coming from the right place. I think that's what we have to understand in the sales process. But sometimes, as you say, sometimes the friction in the sales process is due to the fact that we don't understand each other properly. So that seems to be, to a large extent, what Thomas International is driving towards: better self-understanding, and then trying to take that lens to other people. So now this is a question I always love to ask on the podcast. Is this the career you had in mind at 16?
Heavens no. Heavens. That's easy. So I was going to be a dancer. So that was kind of my dream. My backup option was to give back to the world and work in nonprofit. That was important to me. I spent a lot of my childhood in Latin America. And so that was a really important value for me. And so
whereabouts in Latin America were you?
All over. So
Really?
Ecuador, Curacao, Paraguay, Argentina, Puerto Rico. So quite a broad range. But I went into university. I started studying dance. Thankfully, in the US, you can change majors easier than you can in the UK. And then over the course of that, moved into nonprofit. So again, really giving back into the world. And then realized there was a limit in how far I could progress with that when I moved to DC, Washington, DC. And so ended up in a commercial role after a few years. And I always consider myself an accidental saleswoman in all ways, because at that point in time, certainly when I was at CEB, there weren't that many women that I saw ahead of me who were in commercial roles. So I started there in a research role. And it was really only through a tap on the shoulder by one of my managers, who was running actually the commercial team at that time, before he was my manager, who said, "Hey, why don't you go sell?" And I kind of said, "Really? Me? Are you sure?" But I think it was a very natural fit, as I'm sure we'll talk about more, because it gets into what sales really is, which is communication as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the key skills. I think people need to understand that. I mean, what you're doing at Thomas, if I'm right, is you're trying to understand people's personality to a degree, which is fine, which is actually super important. That more important now than ever in selling, I believe, because one thing you can't replicate with AI is personality. It's going to be a while before they get to that point. If they do, we're all going to be deeply worried, I suspect. But I think that's a little way off. But what people sometimes don't always understand is that there's a difference between a talent and a skill. Skills can be gained, can't they? Sales is a skill. We can teach people how to sell. But you'll do it better if it comes from a place of understanding what you bring to it as an individual.
Yeah, and I think there's the authenticity and ability to be yourself is critical, right? And I think if we all think about it, we all have an internal engine. We all have parts of ourselves that you can think back to yourself when you were 5, 8, 16 years old and say, yeah, I kind of see why I'm doing this thing now, why this energizes me, why I have this tendency. But I don't think we always think about that as we think about our careers and where we want to be and where we're a good fit. And again, even when we looked at our profiles as a senior leadership team at Thomas, my colleague who leads finance has a very different behavior profile than I do and personality profile. And that makes a lot of sense because we are asked to do very different things within our roles.
How did it help to improve the working when you understood your differences?
Such a great question. For me, empathy and awareness, right? So it allows you to depersonalize some of the communications differences that we all have as human beings, and to really ground in the fact that someone else has different communication needs, different requirements that it's up to me to flex to. And again, not to assign intent around that. Nothing about how I communicate is inherently better or worse. It's just the way I communicate and someone else, and it's up to me to flex to that with them.
Yeah, it's understanding that we receive information differently. We perceive behavior in different ways as well, don't we?
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
and being sensitive to that, being in the moment in your conversation, but being sensitive to how people might perceive it. Something took me a long time to learn, to be honest with you.
And again, like it's really interesting, right? Because those are all of the kind of soft skills that we talk about that are really hard to teach in ways, really hard to learn, really hard to interview for as well. So I think assessments played a really important role there. And what's interesting with technology is a lot of those soft skills for newer hires, newer grads coming up through the ranks, they're actually going away because they are so much on technology that they're lacking a lot of the refinement, literally on things as basic as holding eye contact, making small talk, all of these things that are so important. But I worry it's a little bit of a disappearing piece of humanity in ways, if I can say it like that.
Yeah, because we're adjusting to a different way of working where I don't know what percentage of your sales calls do you think would be face to face now and physically?
Absolute minority. I've got reps who've never done face-to-face meetings. And then,
Is that trend here to stay? You don't think we're going to get back in cars and trains?
no, I think it is
How do you feel about that?
mixed, right? So a lot of value, as you know, right? We've got, I don't know, your Zoom's quite good. I've certainly got enough gray hairs to remember.
I've been around for a while.
The ability to actually see people, sit down, have that contact, and build that relationship has huge value in a lot of ways. But on the flip side, think back to how much wasted time, wasted effort, face to face does not value make, right? So I think there's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And I think it challenges us to think about if we're going to spend time with a client or prospect face to face, is it good use of our time and theirs? Are we adding value to the conversation? It's really up the ante, I would hope, for what we are trying to do in that sort of arena.
And what about women in sales then? You were an early pioneer in a sense. I don't know how many female chief revenue officers there are of biggish companies like Thomas. Don't know, but again, I've struggled to find enough people in that space, women in that space to come on the call. What about that dynamic and how are you seeing that? Do you think we can in a sort of, is sales becoming the sort of profession that more women are likely to join as opposed to the marketing route that seems to be more accepted as a professional route typically? That's my observation.
Yeah, and even customer success, right? So at CEB, so young male talent would tend to go into sales. Young female talent would overall tend to go into customer success or customer service, it was probably called at that time. And I think we do see a real gender split very often between the two. And let's be honest, right? A lot of the skills and ways of working in sales, as you think about being authoritative, as you think about negotiation, as you think about being very sharp and clear in things, these aren't skills that women are rewarded for, right? Data shows very, very clearly that women who flex a lot of these skills are viewed in a more negative way compared to their male counterparts. And I had some very interesting conversations with 2 female revenue leaders over at a revenue intelligence platform around this exact point and some of the comments that one of them had received. So I don't think it's easy, but I think the key point is really making sure that we keep women growing throughout their careers, particularly through these detours that having children can create, and certainly did for myself. And as we hire, making sure that we get away from hiring a lot of people who've been there and done that, right? And looking at capability in a much more broad way. And I've been really fortunate to have some hiring managers in my career that put bets on me. I wouldn't have necessarily been the obvious candidate, but they saw my potential and I fulfilled that and surpassed that for them. So I think we all need to make those educated bets as well at points in our careers.
You went from being a research analyst at CEB into a sales role.
I did, and it's even funnier than that because it was back in the days of pounding the pavement. You can't see me. I'm very small. I'm 5'2" on a good day. And my first live meeting was in Amsterdam, sitting across from a 6 foot plus tall head of internal audit was Heineken or ING. I had the meetings back to back, 6 foot tall, and my feet don't touch, right? So you talk about interesting dynamics too. But the best thing about it is you learn on your feet. You can learn through doing. And I think one of our account managers yesterday said that very, very well and artfully too. That's the beauty of sales. You always have to, or have the opportunity to, I should say, stretch yourself beyond your comfort zone and learn and iterate. And so did I think that I wanted to be in sales? Not really. Did I think that I wanted to be in front of clients and prospects and share ideas and convince them to come on board? Absolutely, right? That was fun. And I think, again, if we position sales in that way, we'll get a lot of people coming in of all different diverse backgrounds that we need more of as well.
The Dutch are the tallest people in the world, aren't they?
Yes, and I think I'm probably one of the shortest. So there you go.
The average.
Shifting 2 years.
Yeah. I've got a very good friend from the Netherlands, and he's always keen to point out to me that actually you can't say Dutch doesn't apply. It's a region of the Netherlands. So the Netherlanders, just for the benefit of my good friend Paul Bongard, that's average 6 feet tall, which is, no one quite knows why. But I'm fascinated as to how you position yourself in that meeting. Physically, there was obviously a massive disparity in height, but in terms of your self-esteem and where you saw yourself, I think this is a real challenge for certainly new salespeople who find selling to the C-suite, and maybe as an added dynamic, women selling mostly to men at the C-level. How do you level yourself up emotionally so you perceive yourself to be on the same level? Because I believe that we all are. I don't think anyone's better than anybody else unless you consider yourself, unless you diminish yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, some of the things that you've expressed curiosity in as well. And a whole bunch of life is self-talk, no matter what. And so if you've got a good self-talk narrative, your life in its entirety will be much easier. And in sales, even doubly so, because God, you're going to face a lot of setbacks, right? I think the other point of things is that for me, coming from CEB, I was really fortunate because I was working at a company that had a point of view, that had a contrarian point of view, so that I could sit with anyone. I mean, I sat with many CFOs for years after that, and I could tell them something that we had done research on and we had a point of view on, and they would lean in and say, gosh, I really hadn't thought about that. You're right. And that authority comes from also that linkage to marketing, to product marketing, and having reps feel, I've got a story and a narrative to tell here that extends well beyond features and functionality and, hey, do you want to look at the product?
Yeah, and I think the thing about a point of view, as you will agree, I'm sure, it needs to be backed by facts, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
We can all have a point of view, and we can all bang on about. I'm very good at banging.
All views.
Yeah, I've got a good friend of mine. We have the sort of a various arguments around politics, and we're slightly different in terms of our political positioning. I've come to realize now I have to be very well prepared when I have conversations with him, because Mike is so well, he's so thorough. He'll come out with stats and stuff and go, surely that can't be right. Then, of course, after the call, after we've finished, I'll Google it. I go, he was right, actually. It's amazing. I don't know. So that's the great thing about your background. That's probably where research helps you. I'm assuming you probably, and of course, Thomas does a huge amount of research as well, doesn't it? So that must be part of your sales methodology in this company, I guess, to be really well informed when you put a POV to people.
Yeah, and it's increasingly more so, right? Because I think if you look at our heritage, we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of people who have used us and really value the work that we've done with them and want to work with us again. And we're super, super fortunate in that way. And I think the next step on from that, where we're really driving towards much more, is also having an informed point of view, particularly as we bridge forward into the future of Thomas, right? and into a future that is not just looking at assessments of the individual in isolation in that traditional sense, point in time and we see you, but using that to really start to shine a light on people in the flow of work. And again, getting towards that component of team dynamics where you'll hear a lot more from us as well. And I think that for me is the crux of where work happens right now. And again, hopefully we'll do a lot to address the foundational productivity issue that we see in most major economies, certainly here in the UK quite acutely as well.
So do you think that with this sort of new approach, I mean, selling's changing, isn't it? It is changing. I mean, you're living proof of that you've come up, and the traditional kind of the old school way. I think one of the reasons people don't see sales, or many people don't see sales as the profession that we know it is, and it has to be, is because it's been characterized as this hard-nosed, very male-dominated, quite aggressive. You've got to go out and do a hard close on people and bash them over the head to get an order, haven't you? Be very confrontational. This is what people think when they look at a career in sales. Your journey suggests that not only has it changed, but it's going to continue to change. And therefore, people coming in from your background, women, frankly, coming in to a profession that doesn't look so male or macho, it's going to be a continuing trend, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think, a big part of that is we need to get people confident and comfortable talking about money, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Whether that's talking about their own salary, whether that's talking about the price that they want to command for a certain product, people need to get comfortable talking about money. And without that, it's really, really hard to be super successful in a commercial role and really in ways to advocate for yourself as well. I've had so many times where I've had people say very sheepishly, I hate to talk about my salary, but I really need to ... And I always say to them, please feel like you're your own, CFO. You've got to advocate for yourself, and people should feel really empowered to do that. And it's really nice because while I certainly never thought about moving into a commercial role when I was 16, my older son, Ethan, who is 16, wants to get into sales.
Wow.
Both of his parents are CROs. He has seen it. And I think he really values the meritocracy that sales can offer and the fact that you can really rise to the top with the grit, with the effort, with the thoughtfulness as well. And so that we'll see where he ends up, but it's very sweet at this point in time, at least.
I think that's lovely. I think it's the money thing's really interesting because my perception is Americans typically are much more comfortable talking about money. Yeah. It's probably one of the reasons why actually you've got a more successful economy, at least in broad financial terms, much higher growth over the years. Whereas in Britain, I'm an exception to this. I mean, I love talking about money, but it's probably one of the reasons why I ended up in sales, right? A bit more. And I don't see it as anything that we should keep quiet about. Absolutely be confident. And in the sales process as well. I mean, if someone asked me someone asked me the other day what my pricing policy is, and I said, well, you know what? I charge as much as people can afford. Mm-hmm. Right? And there's a value-based statement in there as well, because they associate, if you're providing enough value, people will pay more money. And, because I'm a coach and a mentor, sometimes that's nothing. People, for young graduates that need some help, I'm fine with that. Yeah, put the money on the table, absolutely. And be aware of your own self-worth. I think we perhaps diminish that. Maybe women do that. Women are traditionally not brought up always to have that sense of self-worth. Sounds like you were, though, so that's great.
Yeah, I mean, again, I just think you've got to really almost set out your own, the younger you can actually define what matters to you as a person and try to set that as your must-haves, must align to this. I think the easier figuring out that path as you grow your career and just your life overall is.
And what about leadership then? Do you think that women in general can bring different angles to leadership? Is that
Yeah, so I mean, leadership for me is really about leading from the front. And what I mean by that is you need to be involved into the nuance of the day-to-day, right? I was talking with my directs recently about not being ivory tower managers, in the sense of just like, we all need to be out there on the front line, having client and prospect calls, because without that exposure into our week to week, it's very easy to lose sight or build perspectives or hypotheses that aren't grounded in the reality on the ground. So I think no matter what the size of your org is, keeping that frontline facing view is super important to leadership. I think on leadership as well, in my experience, there is a quality of leading with soft and human touch that can be flexed a lot. And it's something that I think I've seen female leaders bring into the mix if they can lead authentically, right? So I think a very common approach is I need to lead as if I were a man and bring in things that aren't authentic to me and how I quite literally show up in whatever way that may be. So I do think there's some really unique characteristics of leading with as a female that I think are to be celebrated, right? And part of that authenticity that people need to be able to bring.
There's been some great examples. I mean, COVID, I think, shone the light on female leaders with some real clarity. Like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who seemed to communicate very, very clearly, very maybe the way you were describing it, actually, Jenny, quite directly, quite candidly, telling people exactly what was going on. Communication is such an important skill, isn't it? Such an important skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that there's a lot of our superpower as human is, as really good leaders, is to keep that kind of peripheral view of how people are doing, how people are feeling. Because while there's always that top line growth and goals and all the things that we need to hit, you've got to bring people with you in that journey, and you've got to have them energized and motivated and excited, or you just won't be there, right? And I think doing those two things in parallel takes a lot of finesse, and a lot of it is just not stuff you can teach even.
And what do you do to keep energized and motivated for yourself?
So I practice a lot of mindfulness. So that is something I do because most of my life is up here. So I also try to make sure I'm taking myself down a level. I also do a lot of fitness and training. So that's really important to me, stepping away, moving, getting the endorphins going. And then I love traveling and I love going to the theater. So trying to explore as much as possible as well.
Are you still dancing?
On a Saturday morning. So tomorrow morning I will be dancing. I will. I'm not going to lie, but I will not be putting it on a video podcast anytime soon.
That's fine. Well, we won't ask you to do a turn now. That's absolutely fine. So we're galloping along through this. I've got time for a couple more questions if you have. Are you good for that? After all of this career that you've enjoyed and still enjoying, and the growth that you've seen personally for yourself and for the team and the company that you work for, you obviously had a chance periodically to reflect on what you've been through, your experiences, if you like. What's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that you picked up along the way, Jenny?
There's a huge amount in there. I think that the biggest part of things that I would advise myself if I were sitting next to my 22-year-old self when I went into the world of work, and I'd probably advise myself the same thing today, quite frankly, is be kind to yourself, right? What I mean by that is in a commercial role, whether you're an SDR, salesperson, a manager, a CRO, it doesn't matter. There's only so much you directly control. And sometimes we work really bloomin' hard and things don't go our way. And it's really, really hard at points to let that go, right? I always think about my younger son, Theo's football matches. And when they miss a goal, they say, unlucky, right? They don't say, man, you were really crap. Maybe, he's not Premier League, granted, but I think it's that mindset that we all need to bring where we learn from our mistakes, of course, but we also realize in a commercial role, there's got to be swings and roundabouts, as the Brits say, which is a wonderful saying, and things aren't always going to go our way, and that's okay.
many salespeople are extremely competitive, aren't they?
Yes.
And therefore we don't like to lose. And we see, sometimes I think there is a focus more, I think often there is, I speak from a personal perspective, much more focused on the destination than the journey. So more focused on the goal than enjoying the process of reaching that goal, or sometimes not reaching it. Let's be honest, sometimes overachieving it, sometimes not. I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it? And the being kind to yourself. You're not always going to win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even on that too, right? Like one thing that I do, and the research backs this up. So there's a great book called The Happiness Advantage, fabulous book, and he's on a lot of podcasts too. And one of the things that is scientifically validated is that if you write down 3 things at the end of the day that you are grateful for, suddenly your lens goes much more towards the positive, right? And even the positive and the negative rather than the negative. And it's something I recommend to my directs as well, because when we're fighting big, meaty battles, big quotas, big change management, we lose sight of all of the micro wins that we're having, and being able to literally take a moment to document them, internalize them is really energizing.
Jenny, I can tick one of those boxes. It's something I've been grateful for today is the conversation we've had.
But thank you.
bit cheesy, but true.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind.
I really enjoyed it. Did you have anything in closing?
No, I'm super, happy to connect with people off the back of this conversation if it would be useful to from a networking perspective as well. I'm always interested in speaking with other revenue leaders in particular and idea and experience exchange. But I just really thank you for, having me on, and hope a few of the insights shared today will be valuable to others as well. Pay it forward.
Absolutely. And thank you to the listener. If you like what you've heard, please do give us a review. It helps to boost the ratings enormously so more people can find this content. And you can always share it on your favorite social media platform.